Welcome, everybody. I love seeing the comments even as we're moving through our little kind of front end trailer there. Hello from New Smyrna Beach, Florida, by way of Chicago. Love seeing a Chicagoan in here. Hello from Palm Springs. Tiffany from Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, everybody. My name is Max Timm. If you don't know who I am already, I am the Director of Education for the International Screenwriters Association. I also have a consulting company called The Story Farm. I can give you more info on that a little bit later. But Joe Beatty, how are you? Jennifer from Montreal. It's good to see everybody. These classes, I guess we can call them, are free to the ISA membership. For a week, if you're a basic member. After that, it's for Connect members only in terms of the recordings. The recording will exist here on YouTube for a little while. For those of you watching the recording of this and you were not able to attend live, the whole idea here is frequently asked questions. I get a lot of them. The ISA as a whole gets a lot of them. And so if you weren't able to attend live, please ask questions in the comment section or just make a comment. Hopefully a polite one. But we will answer your questions in the comment section if you're watching the recording of this, and you can ask us whatever you want. With that said, I have a small list of FAQs that I am going to just kind of prompt as we go. But I want to have you all ask your own questions, okay? Whatever your questions might be, preferably in relation to the entertainment industry. I'm not a therapist. I am not necessarily certified to give life advice. I can do my best if you have a pressing question that has nothing to do with the entertainment industry, but we're here to talk about screenwriting. So we will do that. But Jennifer, happy to see you. Max, I love these sessions with you on Wednesdays. I learned so much. That's great. I do this once a month. We have one more in November, post Thanksgiving, and then December we're going to take off. But then that leads us into the new year, which I'll give you some info in terms of what we're going to do next year. I'm really excited about what we're going to do next year. I have a whole bunch of plans. That also means a whole bunch of work that I have ahead of me in terms of actually following through and executing those plans. But that's why I'm here. So like I said, if you have questions, you can ask them at any time. Craig is the founder of the ISA, but I almost called Scott, our editor and producer, who's kind of behind the scenes monitoring all this. I almost called you Craig, Scott, so I apologize. He is going to highlight some of the questions as we go. I'll go for probably like 30 to 45 minutes with my own answers to questions that I've listed. But again, if you have a question anytime, or if you want me to go a little bit further and give more to a particular FAQ that I bring up, please feel free. The first question I'm going to cover is, how do I know when my script is ready? I get the question all the time. Before I dive into that, I want to give you a little bit of info on what we have going on next year, because I think all of you watching, whether you're live or if you're watching the recording, you'll be interested in this. This current year, 2023, I held 2 30-day challenges. I'm going to do them again next year, one in January and one in June. This past January, I was on Zoom office hours every single day for 30 straight days. It was very helpful for everyone, but I'm not going to do it again. It was a lot. It helped kind of form this community, et cetera, of everybody popping in and asking questions and et cetera, for all those 30 days. I'm not going to do it every single day. I will likely do it every other day, or maybe 3 times a week. The irony is that that time in office hours takes away from your time to actually write during those 30 days. So I'm going to do those 2 again, January, but then I'm also going to be hosting 6 2-hour classes that will be somewhat similar to these webinars, but I'm going to go into a lot more detail. I'll probably have a lot of various, screen share images that I'll show. We're going to do some scene studies in both TV and film. It's going to be cool. It's going to be a lot of fun. They will be paid classes. In a way, I feel like I should apologize for that. But then again, I will still continue to do these free webinars on top of those 6 classes. So don't worry. If you can't afford it, I completely understand. We will still continue with these free classes. Recently, I held a writing retreat for my Story Farm one-on-one consulting writers. And I had 8 writers come to Wisconsin, stay at this big, beautiful house. It was fully catered. I made some of the food myself even. Plenty of drinks available. It's an all expenses paid thing, not including airfare. But it was so great. It was 4 nights, 5 days, and the writers get so much out of it. I'm going to be doing more of those next year, at least one more, preferably more if I'm able. So if you have questions about that, if you have questions about the Story Farm in general, I'm launching a new professional program in 2024, which is going to be very intensive in terms of how much work you're going to be doing in a group with experienced writers. So you can just go to thestoryfarm.org and you can find information on that and the retreats, or just email me, max@thestoryfarm.org. Thank you, Scott. Perfect timing. Bad Reception is commenting with, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed being on an ISA member this year. That's great. If you're not a paid member, it's totally okay. But for $10 a month, you do get quite a bit more. And this particular FAQ class webinar is not necessarily going to be covering all of the benefits that the ISA has. I am not necessarily the right person to ask that. However, if you have questions about what Connect does or what the ISA membership offers, please, of course, feel free to ask and I will give you my best answer. So let's go back to that question. How do I know when my script is ready? I think the quick and somewhat lazy answer is that it's never ready. It's never really ready. But there are so many caveats to that. And again, I get this question so often because it's a really legitimate question that even I myself and our staff, when we're working on the production company side, we have a production company called Creative Screenwriter Productions, and we're looking at material. It's difficult to really determine when, what do we have? When is this script actually ready to go out to town in terms of let's shop this project? So you could be asking yourself the same question. You want to be specific with why you're asking, how do I know when my script is ready? What does that mean? When it's ready to be produced or when it's ready to submit to a screenplay contest. There are, varying factors there. Let's not even worry about, is my script ready to be produced? Because we technically, this is the hard truth, have zero control over whether or not or when our script could be produced. We have to just lose control of that because it is not our decision unless we're able to fund our own projects, which, if you're able to do that, by all means. However, you still need to go through the process of heavy development. I think my general rules for kind of helping yourself determine, how do I know when my script is ready for the initial approach to submitting to contests, fellowships, agents, and managers. At least 3 relatively hefty rewrites. At least 3. You find that you end up doing a lot more than 3 anyway. And when I say hefty rewrites, it's almost like this, and we don't necessarily need to take this so literally, but kind of coming at it from a percentage standpoint, 60 to 70% of a rewrite for that first rewrite. And that's not just editing. It's not changing scene direction. It's not adding spaces or, reducing some dialogue. That's just editing. Real changes, not only story changes, new complications, new twists, but character motivations, new scenes, new moments. That's what a rewrite is. We have to be willing, and it's very difficult. This is going to sound a lot easier said than done. We have to be willing to accept that first draft that we write is not ready, like that this is not the best version of my idea. Even though there are probably going to be things about the first draft that you love, and I hope there are, it's not the best version. And when that's a good thing, like that's optimism. It's not looking at it like, oh God, this is such a crappy draft, or it's my vomit draft, or let's try to get rid of that terminology and vernacular. This is the best approach you made in the process of this script's existence at this point. So you still have a ton to be proud of, even though it is technically, to go to that negative vernacular, a vomit draft. It's okay. But we also have to flip that in terms of looking at it optimistically, and then really be intense in terms of we can't lie to ourselves. We know deep down the certain spots within the script, whether it's multiple sequences, multiple pages, or my second act is just not exciting enough. And I have another question I can dive in to help with that. But how much actually needs to be changed. And a lot of times writers who are young in terms of their experience, I don't necessarily mean age, new writers tend to accept that first draft as either good enough or really close. And I'm here to tell you, the bad news is It isn't. It just isn't. And that's okay. Like we have to be okay with that. So how do you know when your script is ready? At least 3 rewrites, solid rewrites with receiving notes from people. You have to give it to people that you trust. You have to, I was going to say you have to pay a consultant or a reader. You don't have to pay a consultant or a reader, but you need someone who's an experienced reader in some way, someone who is either in a writing group or you find, something online. You have to be willing a little bit to spend some money to invest in yourself. This is not just a pay for play kind of thing. You're investing in yourself. Actors who come into LA or New York, they know when they're starting out their career, they have to take acting classes. They have to pay for those classes. So you have to kind of, if you're going to do this, be willing to invest in yourself. Don't go crazy because it can get really expensive, if you're working in a budget. But you need notes from people. And another little, rule of thirds, get notes from at least 3 different people who are not your mom or your dad, someone who's going to be honest with you, because then you can start seeing patterns within those notes. Then you jump into another rewrite. You go through that rewrite and you try to go through the process again. As you get more and more experienced, you won't need to get as many notes from other people. That goes into a whole other question about, how many. Well, actually, I don't even know if I have that question in here, but it's the idea of, when am I really a screenwriter, which isn't necessarily a frequently asked question. But, once you have 3 or 4 scripts that have been done and developed, you start to have this stronger feeling of what my voice is. You have much more confidence because you know how to approach the development of a project. So kind of the rule of thirds, at least 3 rewrites, at least 3 sets of notes from 3 different people. And then start kind of small. Get, now I'm jumping ahead, how do I know when the script is ready? But nonetheless, you want to try to start kind of small, find some medium-sized contests, not Nickel, not Austin. Start with some of the smaller contests so that you just see how it goes. Test it out. If you can afford the extra $50-$60 to get a little bit of feedback, do that. The script has to go through a process. And then, maybe you set it aside, or maybe it starts to get some traction. In terms of how do you know when it's ready to be produced? Again, I'll repeat myself. We have no idea. And I'm telling you this also from an executive standpoint or a producer standpoint. They don't necessarily know either. It takes so many other elements to come into play and make something ready. And so try not to think from how do I know, when my script is ready from a producing standpoint. It's more of, is this ready to be seriously considered by various outlets? Let's see here. We have some questions pop up. Anything that's specific to what we're checking in here. Eva is mentioning, when you say 3 rewrites, do you mean rewrite, then get notes, then rewrite it a second time and more notes, or just notes after the 3rd draft? What you say is correct. I don't know. I was starting to get a little tongue-tied. Yes, notes after each rewrite. And if you're open enough, it's okay to get notes on the first draft of something, but you have to be very open and willing to change a lot after the very first draft. And you need to tell people when you're giving them a script, or asking them, would you be able to, spend some time reading this? By the way, it's a first draft, so I really just want to focus on these things, give them a little bit more of a direction. Just tell me what you think of the story, or, are the characters strong enough? Don't worry so much about the dialogue because I'm going to punch that up, so you have to be aware of where you are as the writer within the process of that screenplay. And the reason I'm emphasizing that screenplay is because every script is different. I had a conversation with one of my Story Farm writers. This was a couple years ago. And he was having a lot of difficulty trying to kind of crack the project that we were working on. And he kind of went to this place. He made a little bit of a comment that I'm paraphrasing, about how he thinks maybe I just don't have it. Maybe I don't have the talent or the ability or whatever in general. And I was like, hold on, man. Like you got to get rid of that thought process. You have to look at the script as the script being judged, not you. And that's something that is difficult, because this is a very personal process that we're going through. in terms of being creative and putting our own thoughts and ideas and beliefs and wishes and desires into all these various characters. And this project, whichever one you're working on, it becomes a part of us. So it's almost impossible not to be disappointed in yourself if a script doesn't do well. But I don't know how many times I need to repeat it. I think I'll just consistently repeat it. It's not you that's being judged, it's the script that's being judged. Some screenplays are just going to be more difficult to write and develop because the story is more difficult or more complex, or you have a lot more writers, a lot more characters. You have more storylines. The hook may not be as simple. There are so many different reasons as to why you need to judge the screenplay instead of yourself. So try to pull yourself out of the process as much as you're able. So moving, and I'll get to some of these questions here. Scott is starring a lot of these questions. I'll get to them when I'm done with going through my list of FAQs here. Next question: are screenplay contests worthwhile? Which ones should I apply to and why? Should I take contest notes seriously if it seems the reader just had an off day? I'm kind of going off on a tangent with that one, but I get that a lot. So, the first question really, are screenplay contests worthwhile? Across the board, yes. Is every single screenplay contest worth your time to submit? No, because there are going to be some duds. There are going to be some that just don't get you the traction that you need. I'm not going to point out some of them, but across the board in general, it's good to get your material tested, whether it's a teeny little kind of film festival screenplay contest, just to see how it does there, and then compare it to a huge submission contest like Austin, where they get like 15,000 submissions, which still blows my mind. They're worthwhile to just test the material. I think the problems come up when, again, going back to this taking it personally approach, writers have themselves connected so much to the script that if they don't get it, if the script doesn't go through the quarterfinals, or if they don't even make the quarterfinals, the writer, him or herself, they're taking this on like, oh, I didn't do it. We got to stop that thought process, because it's not you. They're not looking at a bio of you and going, oh, I don't like that person, or whatever, they're a talentless hack, or they're not saying that. They're judging the screenplay. So we have to be able to differentiate. So from a basic level, they're absolutely worthwhile, but caveats here. It becomes very expensive after a while submitting to all these contests. So you have to be careful. You have to budget, just all this whole submission process. Know what you're going to spend. Plan it out. When are the deadlines? When do these become, or when do the contests release their winners or the notifications of who placed? Put a calendar together and go, okay, these 3 contests, I've done a ton of research, which, by the way, Google is usable. You can just Google the contests and you'll see either reviews or news articles about them, or if you can't find anything about the contest, then you make a decision whether or not you want to submit to that. The ISA contests, I will say, and of course this is a little bit of a sales pitch, are extremely worthwhile. And I know this personally because I work with the people who are managing those contests, and they do not take them for granted. All of the readers, they go through the ringer when it comes to their training and their education about how to write the notes, or at least how to consider the scripts that come through. Our contest administrator is so detailed in how he manages the spreadsheets, and it's a real thing. So the ISA contests really do take each contest seriously. So I would suggest looking to make sure the contest is from a reputable source. Have you heard of that organization before? Let's look up some reviews. So you want to be a little careful and do your research. Which ones should I apply to and why? I kind of talked a little bit about that. In terms of contest notes, the hard truth is that, like I said in the question, should I take notes seriously if it seems the reader had an off day? And I'm kind of putting that nicely, because I have received a lot of feedback, not only from the writers that I work with one-on-one, but just, from the ISA membership in general, that sometimes the notes they get back from contests are bad, Like they didn't even read the script. I hear that a lot, which is a bummer. It's a huge bummer. I can guarantee you the ISA contests do not do that. They take it seriously. Sometimes the reader might have a little bit of an off day and they're just not giving the type of detail or feedback that the writer may expect. Doesn't mean they don't care. It doesn't mean that they're just kind of, whatever, I'm just going to write something up and I'm just going to earn my paycheck. Some contests sadly may do that, but Austin had a huge kickback from that process a couple years ago. And it was, big news. And a lot of writers were very unhappy with some of the notes that came back from Austin, and they righted the ship. Like they really took that seriously. And we're like, we are not going to have that happen again. And so they're being, very particular about how they approach that. So sometimes you get notes that just don't help. And here's the deal. Oh, well. There's nothing you can do about it. Complaining about it isn't going to do you any good. Writing to get some kind of, refund back, maybe you get a refund, you might, but how much time do you really need to spend on this? This is just how sometimes the industry works. You may just not receive the type of notes that you were hoping. But I do suggest that when you're submitting to a contest, and if you can afford it, try to pay for the feedback, regardless of what the contest might be, just so that you have, you've spent your money wisely. Otherwise, when you're submitting to contests, it's just like playing the lottery, especially the ones where like Nickel or Austin or Page or Blue Cat, some of those really big name contests receive a lot of submissions. So if you're fighting, I shouldn't say fighting, if you're going up against 8,000 other writers and you're just spending the $50 or whatever it is to submit, and you haven't really vetted the project all that much, you're playing the lottery, and there's a chance that you just wasted $50. But if you spend 75 or 80 and you receive feedback, it's a pretty inexpensive way to get some notes. Sometimes the notes may come back and you're like, well, Jesus, that didn't help at all. It's a bummer. But I don't know what else to say other than move on. This is sometimes just how it goes. Believe me, once you get to a place where you're a professional writer and you're receiving notes from executives from a production company, a studio, sometimes those notes are dumb, just plain stupid. And you're just going to have to do your best with those notes. Sometimes those executives, not all, there are some extremely talented executives out there. Most of them are. But every now and then an executive is going to give you a stupid note. And you're like, what the heck do I even do with that? You then have to just rely on your experience to be able to apply the note as best you can. I'll get into that into the next question. But let's see here. George, a good writer always accepts constructive criticism. Definitely. You have to be willing to consider that my script does need to be improved. If we're the opposite of that and you have this level of stubbornness, nope, this script is it, I'm not going to change that, you're going to have a difficult time. In a way, contest notes, or even just notes in general, receiving notes from people, is a nice way to practice how to discuss this with the person that is giving you the notes, or at least just to kind of emotionally receive them. Because when you do eventually become a working writer, or you set up a project at a studio or a production company, those executives are going to give you a ton of notes and you're going to have to be ready for them. So it's a nice little way to practice. The next, let's see, we have Ron talking about contests. Let's hit that right now. Are they judged differently than how a producer would judge the script for being sold or made? I've received great feedback and placed in the semis with some, but that's it. It's a really good question, Ron. I would like if I had to give either a yes or a no answer to the question, are they judged differently than how a producer would judge the script? The quick answer would be no. Again, but there's always a but in there. It depends on the contest. And I hate that answer because you don't necessarily know, as the writer submitting to the contest, how they're specifically judging them. Usually they're looking for, like a contest is looking for uniqueness above all, but also a talent level. The contest is going to focus a little bit more on how talented is this writer presenting him or herself on the page. Is this a really well-written screenplay? They're not necessarily thinking how marketable is this. That does come into account, but it's mainly about, can this script be a showpiece for our contest? Is this written better than all the other screenplays? Does the story really work? Is the plot an easy, to at least understand and I feel connected to? Are the characters really emotional, or at least in terms of, and I'll get into this in the next question, do I understand those character stakes? And does it have a nice structural approach to it? Is there a rhythm to the script? Like they're looking at those elements a lot more than a producer would. A producer's just going to consume the script. How do I feel about it? They're not going to be judging the screenplay. They're going to be thinking about it from a place of business. Who's the audience? Who can I sell this to? What companies do I know that might be interested in this genre or this approach? Contests also do take into account social justice issues, cultural issues, something that is meaningful from a message standpoint. So there are different ways that a contest is going to look at a screenplay compared to a producer. So just because you may be only, quote unquote, only getting to semifinal placements, which by the way that's a solid. You're doing something right. I always tell my writers that I expect you writers to make it to the quarterfinals. So like in a way, I kind of play a little tough love where I say, like, don't come to me and say, hey, I made it to the quarterfinals. Isn't that great? I mean, of course, my writers can say this happened and I'll be like, that's great. I'm not going to be a jerk about it, but it's not that great. And I hate to be, again, showing that tough love. We should expect to hit it, to hit the quarterfinals. We should also kind of expect to hit the semifinals, but then there are a lot of things that come into play there. How many people submitted? There's a lot that comes into play, but semifinals is something that you can tout, especially for some of the bigger contests, Nickel, Austin, Blue Cat, Page, Fast Track, Emerging Screenwriters, because they get a lot of submissions and they're highly touted. They're well known in the industry. If you get a semifinals placement at, New Brunswick Film Festival Screenplay Contest, I don't know why I said New Brunswick. If somebody's from New Brunswick, I apologize. But, it's like a teeny little town film festival that also happens to have a screenplay contest, and they get like 500 submissions or whatever. You make it to semifinals and you don't win. It's a big mess, just in terms of trying to organize your approach to how you receive the feedback and or response in terms of how far did I go. So if you make it to semifinals in the bigger contests, that's a positive. That's something you might be able to, use to promote yourself and the script. Moving on to the next one, because we're already at about 1:30 Chicago time here. So going right into the notes idea. So what's the best advice on receiving and applying notes? How do I apply the notes that I receive? How do I respond to the notes that I receive? This is a big question, and I could probably spend a lot longer than just 5 or 10 minutes, but it's a tricky question to answer with a blanket statement, because a lot depends on the relativity of the note, meaning there are, you might respond just fine to one note, but then there's something about character stakes or just stakes in general that you're like, well, what do you mean by that? So what we have to do as the writer is be educated about the screenwriting experience and the craft and the process in general well enough to then have a stronger understanding of how to accept and then apply the notes that are given. In other words, you got to continually educate yourself. We have to be. Writers too often think that they can just do this whole thing in a void and, not go to classes or whatever. Anyway, you're all already on this class, so it doesn't matter. But so first of all, if there's a note that you receive that is constructive, but you don't want to apply the note, you don't like it, because there's a whole other conversation about, the notes were just critical and pessimistic and mean, that's a whole other thing. But if there's a note that comes across that, like, for instance, so I made a little note to cover this. Screenwriting Twitter, meaning, well, X, whatever it's called, Twitter has a pretty solid community of screenwriters on there that I think you should all try to, pay attention to. A lot of big contest administrators are commenting back and forth. A lot of consultants have different pieces of advice. nice long trains of comments and threads and things. But Matt Misetich is the founder and the operator of Script Pipeline. Script Pipeline is a friend of the ISA. Matt is a great guy, really smart. And he had this thread that he put out there in terms of this idea of stakes. Like if you receive a note where this producer or consultant or somebody is saying something along the lines of, I didn't feel enough stakes overall. First of all, that's a little bit of a lazy note because the person giving the note should be a little bit more specific, but sometimes you get lazy notes. So you're just going to have to try to read into that. There was a writer on there on Twitter that was saying something along the lines of, I keep getting a note like this, but does this mean I just don't know what stakes means? Like that, of course I know what stakes mean. But what Matt was saying, and it was a really great response, so props to Matt, was this idea that stakes are not just plot stakes. You know, like if I don't do this, the world's going to end. That's like surface level stakes. But when you look at something like a 40-year-old virgin, or Matt used the When Harry Met Sally example, which I loved him for because I bring that up in my classes all the time. People who have been on my webinars before, I reference When Harry Met Sally probably a little too much. But he was saying like that if Harry and Sally don't become together or don't get together, does that mean he just is going to go to Mets games by himself? You know, no. What you really see is the character emotional elements that come into play and why certain situations and moments that the characters experience in some form of a relationship are important to them. And so, like I was referencing about 40-year-old virgin, what are the stakes? Like the plot stakes in that is it's nothing. It's just that he may just never have sex again. Or I should not even again, but ever. He's going to be 40 years old and older, and he's never going to have sex. Not a big deal when you look at it from kind of taking it out of context and as a surface level. But if you really pay attention to what Steve Carell's character is going through, it means everything to him. Like he's nervous about it. He's scared about it. He's incredibly self-conscious about it. He doesn't want his coworkers to know. This is an identity type of level of stakes. And so regardless of the story you're trying to tell, stakes come into play much more on a character personal level. So if you were to receive a note like, I don't feel the stakes, look to the characters, look to how you're presenting how badly they want something but can't have it and what it means to them emotionally. This is, turning into a whole lecture about stakes, but it's going back to that idea that we have to be more educated as a screenwriter. We have to read the books. We have to take the classes. We have to work with consultants. We have to be more than just someone who thinks they're talented enough to write a screenplay. And I know that sounds like kind of tough love. We have to have reasons that we believe internally as to why we're confident enough to write a screenplay. And you back it up by way of experience. So best advice on receiving and applying notes, this answer I'm sure you've all heard, is take the notes, meaning read them, and step away. And this is if you receive written notes. If you receive notes in the room with someone, don't just leave. But if you receive written notes, just consume them and go, all right, I'm going to take 10 minutes, maybe a day, whatever it might be, and just think about them, every single note. And do not act defensively. I think that's rule number one when receiving notes, whether they're written or verbal, or you're working with the studio executive or something. Just receive them. Don't defend the note. Don't explain why you did something. I get that a lot. It's fine to talk through the note, meaning, you kind of think about it and go, okay, so it could be like this, or, you can play with it, but don't defend it. It's the worst thing you can do, and the industry hates it. It's showing more you than it is showing the script and what the next draft might look like. And people want to work with people they like. That it's not just easy to work with them, but they're kind of malleable. They're workable. You can actually, when if I was a studio executive, I want to know that when I give the notes to so and so, that the person's at least going to consider them. Because if they don't, like, I don't want to work with you. This is my job. I'm supposed to develop the script with you. And even if it's a consultant, the consultant is doing his or her best to improve the screenplay, So just consume the note, think about it, and then come back. And if you have a very strong visceral reaction to something, especially if it was insulting or overly critical for no reason. I've received notes like that. Forget it. Like, don't even address it unless it's very insulting. And then you talk to the person and be like, you could have said this differently. That offended me. But that's a very rare case. So do not be defensive. But also, kind of like what I was talking about stakes, try to read between the lines. Don't just read the surface level of the note. That's why consuming the notes and then stepping back and thinking about them slowly and non-defensively, you start seeing, oh, they might mean that by this note. And this is why receiving 3 sets of notes from 3 different people is important, because if you start seeing the same kind of note but said in a different way across 3 different sets of notes, now you're like, okay, well, I'm probably going to have to address that because all 3 of these people are noticing. They're just saying it differently. Next question. I'm going slowly. I only have about 20 minutes here. Let's see here. Okay. We hope you're enjoying. Likes and subscribes here on YouTube are always appreciated. I meant to mention that in the beginning, and I will say this really quickly now, everybody. You're on YouTube watching this. If you're not subscribed to the ISA YouTube channel, why? And I'm being kind of a smartass by saying it that way. It takes like 3 seconds. Subscribe to it. It's totally free. But the reason to do it is because it's a complete free resource of education. We have so many videos on here. It's the same with the pro tips page on the ISA website, networkisa.org. If you're not a member yet, go there. You can do it for free. If you want to pay $10, you have extra access to more videos. But there are so many videos on the YouTube page, everybody. It's silly not to subscribe. Okay. Anyway, that's what I'll say about that. Okay. Last question, then I'll get into yours. I'll try to make this relatively quick because it's kind of a simple answer, but I get this question a lot. Do I need to write in one genre and stick to it? The tricky part about that question is you're thinking along the lines of what the industry wants and expects of you. We can't really do that. Of course, we have to acknowledge what's going on, from just an industry standard, industry-wide approach. What might the industry be looking for? But that can't be the reason we're writing. The reason we're writing and the reason we are an artist in general is because we have something that we want to share and say. We want to share this piece of me with the world. That's why you choose a project to work on, whether it's a TV series, a screenplay, a novel, a short film, whatever, an article. That's why we're doing this. So, first and foremost, do not forget that. We can't think about, okay, so the industry trend right now is horror. I'm going to write a horror movie. By the time you're done actually fully developing that project, that won't be the trend anymore. Horror is probably a terrible example because that's kind of always, it's always in trend. But like Amanda's saying, there's also something to say about if you pigeonhole yourself into one genre, you can create problems because you have other stories to tell. And suddenly you get one hit with a romantic comedy, but you actually really like, period piece dramas. And now you're the romantic comedy writer. The hard part is that could very well happen. And even if you try to write in other genres, in terms of like the rest of your, script inventory, so to speak, that could happen. And the industry might expect you to be always writing those rom-coms. It's not a terrible problem to have if you have a hit and you do really well. And then suddenly, hey, wow, my romantic comedy made $100 million. That's a nice problem to have. But I'll just kind of go back to the initial approach or answer that I gave. Write the stories that you want to write. Don't worry about, I've got, 4, thrillers. Maybe that's just kind of the type of genre that you want to write in. It's okay if you write only in one genre. It's okay if you write in multiple genres. What needs to be a common thread through it all is your personal perspective and voice. Voice means a whole bunch of different things to everybody, but the main thing is it's your perspective on the world and how you comment on it really is the very general way of describing voice. So we try not to worry about that. If you want to write something that means a lot to you, choose whatever genre you think best serves that script. Managers will understand. the manager, once you do become signed by somebody, is going to have to figure out a way to sell you. And, if a manager sees I've got this writer, she's got, 6 different scripts and they're all in different genres, it makes it a little harder for the manager to do his or her job. But they signed you for a reason. So it's the manager's responsibility to figure out, how do I sell this? How do I sell this writer? So to reiterate my answer, don't worry about it. As lazy as that answer is, do you need to write in one genre and stick to it? No, you don't need to. It's up to you. Try not to overthink that. Some really great comments everybody is mentioning here. George is saying, a good writer never stops learning. Knowledge is infinite. It's yeah. It's like Meryl Streep still sees an acting coach for every role. She goes and has this, full set of so-called classes and work with this coach because she's always trying to improve. And boy, has she nailed it. Meryl Streep is as good as you're going to get. We have to make sure that we're constantly improving, even just a teeny bit. You can easily become obsessed with, I'm not good enough. And we don't want to go there. But you have to have this give and take of, right now I'm as good as I can be, but I know that I can probably be a little bit better. So let's improve. But the tricky part is that every project's different. And so you also have to then have this process of letting go if that script just isn't working. Sometimes a script just doesn't make it. Not every screenplay you write is going to work. And even if you're an A-list talent, I remember interviewing Paul Haggis, who wrote $1 Million Baby and Crash, and he's Oscar nominated, maybe even Oscar winner. And when I was interviewing him, this was maybe 5-6 years ago, but he said he has screenplays that he's writing on spec, meaning nobody's hiring him to write them, and he has to go out and try to sell them, and he's not selling them. It's him. That's Paul Haggis dealing with that. So you're going to be dealing with it for the rest of your career. Just because you might sell a project or even get a manager, it doesn't mean your career is set. This is a very, very difficult profession to work in because there are no guarantees. Just because you might set up one project or get staffed on a show, it does not mean you're going to get staffed on another show, and it doesn't mean you're going to sell another script. It's just the hard truth. But if we can just accept that and then allow ourselves to focus on what we love so much about this and why we're doing it, then it actually, God forbid, becomes fun, and it makes the creative process a little bit easier to manage. And you just keep pushing forward, new ideas constantly. I have to come up with new ideas, this new hook. I don't know how I'm going to develop that, but whatever. And you have a long list of potential scripts. We have to get into that mode of, this is fun, so let's just generate as much material as I can, Let's see here. So Amanda, thank you. Yeah, script chat hashtag on Twitter is great. You see a whole bunch of writers asking a lot of different questions that I'm sure you've probably all asked, and you see a lot of really nice back and forth comments. Sometimes you get some shitty people because it's Twitter. We cannot be defensive about anything. Anyway, I don't need to go into a lecture about Twitter. Let's see. Joe is mentioning at the bottom here, the stunt or noisy script still has to be well executed and in a genre the writer likes. To kind of go a little bit further with what Joe is saying, there's something called a stunt script. Usually it's a little bit more in TV, and this is the first part of his question comment. Some managers say young writers should write a stunt script to get producers to read. Do you agree? A stunt's logline attracts attention. Trump's son Barron tries to prevent his election. So a stunt spec, usually in the TV form, sometimes in movies, they don't happen as much as they used to. But what he means is the writer's writing the screenplay just to get attention on their writing. The writer understands that the likelihood of the screenplay getting produced is almost zero. As an example, there was a stunt spec of a Full House episode that went around in the early 2000s, I think, around town. And it was an episode of Full House about the youngest daughter, or it was the twins, maybe. Anyways, the youngest daughter who had her period for the first time. And the whole episode was kind of revolving around the family reacting to this. And no way are they ever going to air that episode. There's no way that episode is going to get made. But the writer knew that, and he or she, I'm not even sure, if it was a he or she, sent it out anyway. And everybody in town wanted to read this thing because they're like, what could possibly happen in this episode? And so it got the writer noticed. It's rare. It does not happen very often. Don't try to figure out what kind of stunt spec could I write, because they aren't as considered anymore. That writer was already repped. The manager or the agent kind of put the script out there, like the writer was kind of already somewhat known, wasn't incredibly successful. So there are caveats there. There was another stunt feature spec about the Peanuts, the Charlie Brown gang, now in their kind of late 20s, early 30s, living in New York. And it was almost like the movie, like the musical Rent, but without the music. Like all these Charlie Brown Peanut characters were going through just really hard lives, and some of them were drug addicted, and it's just ridiculous. That movie would never get made, but people wanted to read it. So I would not try to write a spec script unless you have a really wild idea. The irony is that the industry now, even more so, is looking for really unique projects and ideas. So maybe it could actually get produced, so I would try not to overthink it too much, Joe, but it's a really good question and comment to bring up. Okay, so let's get into some of the starred comments and questions here. So Jennifer is asking, I struggle a lot on dialogue and writing distinctive dialogue and character voices. Do you have any tips or tricks on dialogue tuning? Yeah, it's a really good question. I tried to avoid this one because coaching or teaching a writer how to write great dialogue is so difficult from a teaching or a teacher's perspective or standpoint, because it's something that's so personal to the writer. And so anytime you see a class where they're guaranteeing something like, you're going to know how to write great dialogue after this, really take that with a grain of salt. There's nothing wrong with taking the class and just see what they have to say, because it could be helpful. But dialogue is the one thing that's very difficult for a teacher to teach, because we have to kind of come from this place of a blanket statement. Here's what you do. And yet it's not the same for everybody, because you, Jennifer, have your own personal, independent, emotional response to the world. I was trying to say a word different than voice, compared to somebody else, so like my voice and how I would approach dialogue is going to be completely different to how you would approach that, because it's also then per character, per script, per situation, per moment, so there's a lot of caveats. I will say the best thing you can do is take the character development approach, meaning it's not about developing dialogue, it's about developing who the character is. And so that process of developing character happens long before you get to pages. And so it could be a little bit of a development process issue that we're having, that is keeping us from writing great dialogue. In other words, how I approach it when I'm working with my writers, this is something that we focused a lot on during our retreat about a week or two ago, was moment listing as a way to develop character. So you have a particular character with this type of flaw and personality and belief system and wants and desires, and you take them completely out of any plot, any story, and you just develop that character almost like it's a Dungeons and Dragons character. You're rolling the dice to see what their dexterity is or whatever. You just take them out of context and let's just see who this person is. If I give them this flaw, this is how they might react and then that's moment listing. So it's just a list of brainstormed possible moments that this character could find themselves in, from standing in line at the DMV to being at a crazy wild, soccer football match, whatever the situation might be, and then consider, by way of what you planted for flaw, whatever their personality type is, how they see the world, how would they react in that situation? And come first from kind of a physical response, but then you can start throwing in lines of dialogue and just see what they might say. If you wanted to jump to pages for just to write a scene, test that character out. And you have to be coming from the strong place of that character would say that, not you, the writer, that character would, and then do the same thing for a different character and give them a completely different perspective on life and personality and flaw and all those things. and then really consider, okay, let's put them in some of these situations. Maybe they're the same situation I just brainstormed for that character. Let's see how that character responds. Test them out in some, light pages, just to see how, what they might say in response to certain things. You're going to slowly start to see how different those responses can be. And that's, I think, a key with dialogue, is that they're more response oriented, because it's the situation and the action that's more interesting for the audience than the dialogue is. How often do we really remember lines of dialogue from movies? We'll remember some really great lines from like the best movies, but when you're done watching a movie that you thought was, it's kind of fun. Like I just watched Disney's Haunted Mansion the other night. It wasn't that great. It was fun. It had some fun little moments. I don't remember a line of dialogue from that movie. It doesn't mean it's bad, but it's more about the situation that I remember, the fun, the visuals, because when people sit down to watch a movie at night, whether it's on the couch or they go to the theater, they say, what do you want to watch? They don't say, what do you want to listen to? So the dialogue is more about a reaction to the situation the character's in by way of who that person is. And you could even try to do it for yourself, like have a little bit of like a therapy session and write up, moments that are possible for you to be in, and then consider what you would say in those situations. And then maybe you take that version of you and exaggerate that character, or that version of you, and then put it into a character. That's what I did as a little bit of an exercise for a comedy adventure that I wrote years ago. And I wanted to exaggerate my own flaws. I was very tough on myself when I was listing all my problems, which we all have plenty of. And I just magnified them within this character. And then I put that character in a whole bunch of situations that I knew the character would not want to be in. What are the worst possible things that this character could be forced to do? Let's see that character in those situations. And suddenly I was like, this is kind of funny. And let's make it a comedy. And let's just throw him out into the, shark infested waters and see what he does, see what he says also. So that was kind of a long-winded answer to that. But dialogue is a really big question. It's a good one to ask. Hopefully, that was somewhat helpful in terms of what I was saying. Sandra, question. I have a first look deal with a major British producer as a part of winning a TV screenwriting fellowship. Any advice on prepping for pitching? Sandra, that is a big question. Great question, because it's important, but I'm kind of, exasperated because that could be a long lecture. But best advice, there are a lot of best advices. Make sure that you know your pitch in and out. Don't try to wing it. That would be the worst thing you could do. You probably already know that, but nonetheless, just to reiterate that, really come to a point where you can memorize the pitch. If you're doing Zoom pitches, it's totally fine to have the written pitch in front of you and tell the person, just I'm acting as you, in front of this executive on your Zoom meeting. You can say, if it looks like I'm reading, well, it's because I'm reading. And I hope that's okay. Obviously I'm not going to read this verbatim, but I just want you to know that I have notes and I am going to refer to them. Guarantee 100% of the people will go, great, fine, because they're used to that. In-person pitches, much different. You don't want to be holding paper in front of you and reading from that thing. It's much more difficult. You're going to have to know that pitch inside and out. The next part of it during the actual verbal pitch, whether probably, both, either in person or Zoom, is don't be too married to exactly what you wrote. So it's one thing to memorize it and then just spout it out like you're a robot, because that doesn't allow an interaction. It becomes a speech. So we want it to be emotional and fun, and like you're telling somebody a story. Imagine yourself just sitting around a campfire or whatever in your living room, and you're telling a story to friends. That's what the person on the other side of the screen or in front of you, that person wants to feel that this is a nice interactive conversation. So when you memorize something, you don't leave space for breath or for the person to kind of interject, because I've had that happen where I'm kind of going into the flow of my pitch, and then the person goes, oh, wait, so maybe you do this or that, or they asked a question about something, and it was a really good question, and it totally threw me off, because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to just be pitching. And then I wasn't prepared to respond. that's something you just have to hopefully come about at a natural way. So I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there for now, Sandra. Just make sure that you're comfortable with the pitch itself, the information that you're going to be conveying. Make sure you know it inside and out. Eva, do you recommend the Blacklist? I've heard some bad things recently. I'd love to get your opinion on it. So yes, of course, I recommend the Blacklist because they have a lot of clout in the industry. The first thing to remember is that it's a business. It used to be this kind of industry insider thing, and they expanded it into, a business. The gentleman that runs Blacklist, can't remember his name, really good person. So there's nothing evil going on. They're not trying to take advantage of writers. There are some politics a little bit, but that's not always horrible. Some people might have an argument against that. But, it's a business. So you have to pay to do certain things, and that can suck sometimes. They also receive a lot of submissions. So maybe sometimes, like I was saying about the readers, they're not having a perfect day or something. So I would say, of course, I recommend the Blacklist. Try to take it with a grain of salt kind of thing. It's just like any other screenwriting organization. Well, I shouldn't say that because we're a screenwriting organization, but it's a business and they're trying to make money. But it is very useful. What the Blacklist can do for a particular screenplay, if it does really well and it's highly rated, you're going to get some traction. So it's very possible at the same time you're dealing with a lot of other people who are also submitting. So it's just having a realistic approach. It's kind of the same thing, on the ISA side, but I will say the writing gigs that the ISA posts, they're only available to Connect members, but they come from very reputable sources, producers, organizations that are looking for very specific types of material. And I guarantee you that every single submission, at least in terms of the application, like the log line, whatever the writer says about him or herself, and some of the script, at least some, every single one of them is considered by an employee and set of employees within the ISA to then try to vet through, and find the top ones that can then maybe be recommended to the producer or executive, whomever was posting the gig at the first place. So we all try, we do all have the best intentions. Eva's also asking, can you sell your script without an agent or representation? Absolutely, yes. The general question that I get all the time, I was trying to avoid it because I hear it so much, and I'm sure you've probably heard it too, is, how do I need an agent or manager? How do I get one? I don't want to go too far into that because I've answered it so many times. But can you sell your script without an agent or representation? Absolutely. You do not need an agent or manager. You should have an attorney, some form of an entertainment lawyer. If you have some kind of deal come across your desk, ask some friends. Do you know an attorney that might be able to look at this contract or whatever? Because you need someone who is going to be able to read between the legal lines. But you don't need somebody representing you to sell a script. And really, in a way, you will save that 10% by not having to pay a rep. But if you were to get a project set up on your own, just through cold outreach, which does work, agents and managers are going to come to you. And that's always that position of strength. So I would try to get your work out there first and foremost, long before you're trying to get an agent or a manager. You do not need an agent or a manager right away in the early going of your career. You just don't. And they probably aren't going to take you on anyway. They want people who are experienced. They want people who are going to make them money. So you can absolutely sell a script without having representation. Let's see. MGS is saying, I missed the first 45 minutes. Did we or will we talk about getting representation or a manager? I just talked about that. Cold outreach can work. I will just make it a little bit more specific to the current atmosphere of the industry. You will be hard pressed to get a meeting or receive consideration by a manager, especially an agent right now, because of everything that's going on in the industry. We had a very long writer's strike. The SAG-AFTRA strike is still going. There are a lot of productions that are not moving forward because of this. There are some that are able to move forward now that the writer's strike is done. But what happened is that during that long period of time, and still current time, there's this backlog of projects that production companies and studios and streamers have to focus on. They've put money into those projects and they have not been able to launch yet. And so what managers and agents are going up against is selling new material or selling new writers because there are no takers yet. So the industry is focused on current business first and foremost. They have to take care of all of that, which totally makes sense. It's their investment. They have to do that. So an agent or a manager may not be looking for a brand new writer right now. You never know. So it doesn't hurt to do a cold outreach email to someone. The best thing you can do with a cold outreach email is to just ask them, would you consider me and my material right now? Like show that you're aware of what's going on in the industry. Don't just send the material. Don't just send a list of log lines. Don't send this long list of accolades. It doesn't have to be a formal email. Unlike the publishing industry, book publishing, they are old school formality approach to cover letter, email. It's a whole other skill. And I've worked in that, and it's difficult. And I've reached out to 30 different publishers and agents, and I was turned down by all of them. And I eventually just said, screw it, I'm going to publish this book on my own. But it's a whole other thing. In the film industry, if you want to reach out to a manager, or especially a manager, I would go to a manager first. Don't worry about an agent yet if you haven't sold anything. And just ask them, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I have, a few projects under my belt. I've done relatively well in contests, or I've done really well. And I feel like I'm ready to, for representation. Are you considering new clients right now? Just leave it at that for now. They'll appreciate that because it's easy to read the email and it's a yes or a no type of response for them. Don't give them this whole rundown of your life and backstory and a list of projects. And here are the 17 attachments. Then here's my pitch deck. That's, 2.8 gigabytes. It's unnecessary. They will delete the email because you have to think what's going on the other side of that screen. They're sitting there with so much work that they're trying to figure out because they have to pay their bills. And so they're going to be focusing on their current clients. What can I do to make them money so I make money and keep my job, or at least continue the career that I currently have? A new random writer coming in is not going to be top of mind, especially right now. So you just keep that in mind. It doesn't mean there are no managers considering new clients right now. But the likelihood between now and the end of the year, regardless of when that's happening, meaning even before strike, before pandemic, between roughly the end of October through the end of the year, there's very little new business being considered because you have holidays, you have the last quarter of the year, you have companies trying to solidify everything that's currently on their slate and projects that they need to finish and clients that they've had for forever. And maybe there are deals they have to close. That's what they're focusing on, So between now and the end of the year, I wouldn't put too much effort into trying to reach out to people and get representation. If you have some huge project that is now, was just optioned by somebody, or you have business on the table for a script, then yeah, you might want to reach out to somebody. And if you want representation and say, look, I have this huge project going on right now and I need someone to help me manage that or to rep me, would you consider, and maybe then you'll get a stronger response. Everybody, sadly, I kind of have to go. So I am seeing these other questions, and George is asking if I'm a finalist in a contest, will agents call me? It's a long, you know me already. I have long-winded answers because there are so many caveats and so many different branches of answers to your one question. So the lazy answer to your question, George, is no. I hate just throwing a blanket statement no out there because that's not true. They might. Agents is a stronger no compared to producers or managers. Agents want to represent current business. They want to represent projects, usually a little bit more than a writer. If it's an A-list writer, if it's a writer that they know that they can make a lot of money off of in terms of their whole slate of projects, in terms of the writer's whole, inventory, then sure, but from a contest standpoint, you probably have a better chance of receiving outreach, or at least not outreach, but incoming requests from, a junior executive at a production company or some managers. It doesn't always happen. One of our writers through the ISA, who was one of our top writers, really talented. He's been doing it for a long time. We pitched a couple of his projects around town. He won the comedy section of the Austin Film Festival with his TV pilot. Grand prize for comedy. Received no outreach from the industry. So, he probably could have done a little outreach on himself, or himself, and letting people know, hey, I just won the comedy section of the Austin Film Festival. Would you like to read the script? But he didn't because he wasn't whatever. But nonetheless, people didn't just automatically reach out. So you cannot rely on that. A contest win guarantees you nothing. It's great confidence building. And there are some contests like Fast Track. There are fellowships that focus on really supporting the winners of those fellowships or contests and doing work for them. That then helps you get noticed by people. But, the industry is not really paying attention to that many contests. They want referrals, or they want to, receive outreach from someone who seems professional and smart and kind, easy to work with, so. That's the best I can do with that answer. Those answers in general, hopefully were helpful. Thank you, MGS. I think you said that these answers were helpful. So that makes me feel good. For those of you asking about pitching, there is a recording of a pitching process and pitch deck creation video done by Shayna Weber and Caitlin, our social media director and graphic designer. And that exists currently, I believe, on YouTube. If not, it is through the ISA Pro Tips page of the ISA's website. And it's very helpful. They go through the steps to actually how to build it. Like they show you how to use Canva, this application to help you build and graphically design your pitch deck, but then also they give you tips on pitching. All right, everybody, this video will exist immediately on YouTube after we're done. So if you came in late, you want to watch the beginning, feel free to do that. If you like this and you want other people to experience it, share the link. If you want to join me in retreats next year or any of the professional programs that I'm putting on through the Story Farm, max@thestoryfarm.org, and I'm happy to give you some info. All right, everybody, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you next month at the very least with another ISA webinar.